I'm gonna be honest, I never thought Honkai Star Rail would release a character named Dr. Ratio who quite literally throws up the L plus ratio hand sign at his enemies. But if that was hard to believe, would you also believe that he's free? Yes, Dr. Ratio is their very first free 5-star limited character following the path of the hunt while utilizing the imaginary element. Now, I know what you might be thinking. He has to be bad because he's free, right? Wrong. His kit is surprisingly loaded, boosting his crit rate and crit damage beyond belief. In this video, we'll be covering everything you need to know about our Alabaster Head friend, including his best light cones, traces to prioritize, relics to build, notable Eidolons, and of course, team comps. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel as to not miss out on all new future character guides, or else I'll have to unfortunately give you all 0 points. Let's begin. Starting off with light cones, we obviously have a signature 5-star, which is pretty stacked in terms of stats. So off the bat, you're immediately gaining 20% more crit damage, which is great, but that's not even all. Because for every debuff on the enemy target, the wearer's crit damage will increase by a further 8%, which can stack up to 3 times, by the way. So we're looking at a total of 24% additional crit damage, plus the 20% initial crit damage for a whopping of 44% more crit damage just for having the light cone. And that's not even all. We're not even done yet. When using their ultimate to attack an enemy target, the wearer is going to be receiving an effect called Disputation, which not only increases their damage dealt by 36%, but also enables their follow-up attacks to ignore 24% of the target's defense. So pretty much this is built for Dr. Ratio because he does follow-up attacks, and I could also see this being great for Topaz, but this isn't for Topaz. This is great for Dr. Ratio. So it's honestly a solid pick, as we all should know by now that defense ignorance is extremely valuable, and the light cone itself seems pretty loaded anyways. So yeah, a great 5-star option if you want to get your crit rate out of the way and focus solely on crit damage would be cruising in the Stellar Sea. You're able to get this to S5 easily thanks to the Herda shop, and with that, it provides 16% crit rate off the bat. If an enemy has HP less than or equal to 50%, you gain an additional 16% crit. You're also able to gain attack percent whenever Dr. Ratio defeats an enemy, so that's pretty good. And if you want some quick numbers, this means you're getting 12% from stat bonuses, 15% from bonus ability, 8% from Inert Salsado or Root and Lin Arena, depending on if you want to run either of those two, 10% from 4-piece Wastelander, since Dr. Ratio does benefit from debuffed enemies anyways, and 16% from cruising. That's already 61% crit rate without even taking relics into account. Make that 77 crit if that target enemy is below 50%. It's pretty wild to think about if you want to consider this as a viable option, and we'll definitely get into the traces so you guys know what I'm talking about when it comes to those extra crit stats. There's also Sleep Like the Dead, which will give you a nice stat stick of 30% more crit damage should you go that route instead of the crit rate, especially considering Dr. Ratio provides a lot of crit already. As a top tier 4-star light cone option, the answer is and always will be Swordplay. It's a great light cone to stick on any hunt character, as for each time the wearer hits the same target, damage dealt increases by 8% and stacks up to 5 times. This is already 40% extra damage increase and can easily go up to 80% damage increase at an S5. Only Silence Remains is also another 4-star light cone that doesn't get too much love, I feel. It's a 4-star light cone, so it'll be easier to superimpose this, and when at S5, you're gaining a total of 32% attack, along with 24% more crit when there's at least 2 or fewer enemies on the field. So honestly, this is gonna suck if you're facing an enemy that summons multiple units consistently, as you will be losing that crit rate bonus, but if you're in the Memory of Chaos and up against the right boss or the right elite, Dr. Ratio may excel when using this, so do keep that in mind if you have a couple spare only Silence Remains lying around. Now, let's discuss Dr. Ratio's traces, because this is honestly where you start to realize how insanely stacked his kit truly is. Starting with what you should prioritize, I'd focus on his talent, which will definitely be his heavy hitter. So off the bat, Dr. Ratio will have a 40% fixed chance of launching a follow-up attack when using his skill. The best part about this is that you're able to actually increase that fixed chance for each debuff the target enemy has, increasing by 20% per. You only need a measly, 3 debuffs on the enemy to turn that into a 100% fixed chance. Now, the funny thing is that if you somehow killed this enemy before the talent could launch your follow-up attack, Dr. Ratio just does not care, all right? He's still going to redirect that follow-up towards someone, meaning no one is left off the hook while he's around. Secondly, I focus on his skill. His skill is pretty straightforward, that it just deals imaginary damage equal to a certain percentage of Dr. Ratio's attack to a single target enemy. But remember, this is how you're going to constantly spam those follow-up attacks for those heavy hits. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to make sure you're using his skill. Third trace to prioritize and focus on will be his ultimate that deals imaginary damage to a single target enemy whilst also applying something called Wise Man's Folly. The neat thing about this is whenever an ally attacks that same target who is inflicted with it, Dr. Ratio gets to launch his target or his talent's follow-up attack against said enemy. Wise Man's Folly can be triggered for up to 2 times and only affects the most recent target of Dr. Ratio's ult, so keep that in mind. The count will also reset after using his ult, so definitely want to make sure you're utilizing both of those follow-up attacks, which shouldn't be too difficult anyways, right? Lastly, I'd go for the basic attack, but in all honesty, since Dr. Ratio's kit, as you can see, is playing off of his talent's follow-up attacks, you really want to make sure you're not basic attacking and instead using your skill as frequently as possible, so you could potentially just leave the basic attack at a lower level. I'll leave that up to you. Some major bonus abilities to unlock and pay attention to will be his first and probably his best in my opinion, the Summation ability, where whenever Dr. Ratio uses his skill, for every debuff on that target, his crit rate and crit damage will be increasing by 2.5% and 5% respectively. Oh, and by the way, this can also stack up to 6 times. Come on now, that's a whopping 15 crit rate and 30 crit damage total, assuming you're able to stack 6 debuffs, which if you are pairing him with Silverwolf, it should be no problem to pull off. And we'll get to the team comps later throughout this video as well, so stay tuned. Next will be his Dedication ability, where if dealing damage to a target that has 3 or more debuffs, damage dealt by Dr. Ratio to that target will increase by 10% up to a max of 50%. This is yet again another reason why Silverwolf is going to shine, as she's easily able to place multiple debuffs onto the enemy for Dr. Ratio's benefit. To also help with his debuff application, we also have his last bonus ability called Inference, where when the skill is used to attack an enemy target, you have a 100% base chance to reduce the target's effect res by 10% for 2 turns. It is nice that Dr. Ratio also has something in his kit that can give you a +1 to the debuffs being placed onto the enemy, so we'll take it. And as for his stat bonuses, you'll be receiving 12% additional crit rate for just unlocking all those stat bonuses. That's 27 total crit rate with 30 crit damage just off of the traces alone. Let that sink in. Alright, so focusing on relics now, I honestly recommend the 4-piece imaginary set, as you will be increasing your imaginary damage for the 2-piece, and most importantly, you'll be able to further increase your crit rate by 10% so long as the enemy is debuffed, which again, they should be since his kit revolves around that. Bonus points is you also get 20% more crit damage if you're attacking imprisoned enemies, so pairing with Ruan Mei for easy breaks or Walt to imprison them may also be smart. As a secondary set, I can recommend would be a 2-piece Wastelander and a 2-piece Grand Duke, so you're still benefiting from that imaginary damage bonus while also increasing the damage dealt by your follow-ups by 20%. And then moving over to the Planar sets, you'll thankfully be surprised at the vast amount of options you have to run with Dr. Ratio. So this chart you're currently looking at is apparently pulled from Pridewind to calculate the exact damage numbers and damage loss depending on which set you decide to run. The good news, they're all relatively around the same mark. Firmament is at the top if you're hitting that 135 speed threshold, with Space Sealing Station and Inert Salsado following immediately right after. Now, honestly, in my opinion, I'd go for any of these, whichever you have the better substats for, because like I always say, substats over set bonus any day, all right? Do not force a set bonus, especially if your substats are looking like flat defense and flat HP, please. For me, I may go with Inert Salsado, as it not only boosts my talent follow-up damage, which is basically Dr. Ratio's whole shtick, it also provides even more crit rate, so I can focus on building more speed and more crit damage. So win-win, right? In terms of main stats, I'd go for crit damage for the body, since you'll be able to gain a bunch of crit rate already thanks to his traces and bonus abilities. Then of course, speed for the boots, imaginary damage for the orb, and attack percent for the robe. As for the substats, I'd focus on building any additional leftover crit you may need, which shouldn't be too much. Heavy focus on crit damage, since Dr. Ratio's kit already provided quite a bit of crit rate for you, into speed and attack percent. Let me know down below which artifact set you'll be running on your doctor ratio, by the way. I'm curious. Some notable Eidolons if you guys are thinking of rolling for them, especially since we already got them for free, so there might be some potential here. I want to start with what I believe may be one of his most busted, and that's his E1. So it reads that his bonus ability Summation will increase his stacks by 4 while immediately granting you 4 stacks as well. If you guys need a refresher, Summation is the bonus ability which provides you crit and crit damage for every debuff the target has. This means you'll be going up to 10 potential stacks total for a whopping 25% crit rate and 50% crit damage. Definitely think about running him with Silverwolf now if you get this, right? His E2 is pretty neat as well, since when his talent's follow-up attack hits a target, and for every debuff that target has, you'll be dealing additional damage. Plus, this effect can also be triggered for a maximum of 4 times during each follow-up attack, so more additional damage. E4 is simple yet strong, since whenever Dr. Ratio's talent gets triggered, he's generating 15 more energy. That's 30 guaranteed energy for his ult, since it has 2 charges, and an additional 15 per skill for 45 energy total. Seems great at cycling back to his ult quickly. And finally, we have his E6, which increases the Wise Man's Folly count for his ult by 1, so you go from 2 stacks to 3, meaning you also go from 30 easy energy back to 45 energy. Oh, and the talent's follow-up attack also increases by 50%. So now imagine how much damage that follow-up attack is going to dish out. Honestly, I feel like E6 may be a bit overkill, so as a recommended stopping point, I personally enjoy his E1 the most, since you go from 15 crit and 30 crit damage to 25 crit and 50 crit damage. Overall, really great. All right, last but not least, we have team comps. Now, I've mentioned throughout this video of some use case scenarios for Mr. Dr. Ratio himself, but I'll quickly throw some other units around and explain their use cases as well. So first up, like I've said, we've had SW Silverwolf, who is able to easily apply multiple debuffs onto the enemy. This will greatly benefit Dr. Ratio, as not only is he a hunt character and SW can reduce the defense of a single target immensely, but Dr. Ratio will be gaining more crit and crit damage the more debuffs the target enemy has. Plus, the added bonus is that if an enemy isn't weak to imaginary, SW can help you out with that as well, so win-win-win! Secondly, we have Ruan Mei, who in all honesty is a great Harmony character in any team comp, and will also shine with Dr. Ratio, as we can easily break the enemy's toughness, imprisoning them, which will also count as a debuff, and letting Dr. Ratio benefit more from his 4-piece imaginary set, aka more crit damage. She'll also be providing a damage increase, speed, all-type res penetration. Ruan Mei is just too good for everyone. I mean, come on now. Third, we have Topaz, who can inflict proof of debt status onto the target enemy, making them take increased damage from follow-up attacks. Pretty much the whole kit that Dr. Ratio is around. So it could literally be the Numby and Dr. Ratio show having a field day with nothing but follow-up attacks after follow-up attacks. Sounds like a dream come true in all honesty. And then maybe other units like Walt to easily imprison enemies for his 4-piece Wastelander, Ting Yun for energy and damage, Grania, the list goes on in all honesty. The team comp I'm going to personally run will probably be Dr. Ratio, SW, Ruan Mei, and then a sustained character. But I am really eager to try Dr. Ratio with Topaz, SW, and then another sustained character instead. And who knows, maybe in the future we have a sustained character that also benefits follow-up team comps. We'll have to see, right? That would be very good for Dr. Ratio and Topaz, would it not? But that's pretty much it. That's our entire Dr. Ratio guide. Definitely let me know which team comps and relic sets you guys are going to be using on your Dr. Ratio, assuming you guys will build him. He's definitely becoming one of my favorite characters, and I'm glad Honkai Star Rail gave him to us for free, especially with Pentaconi in the next update. Thank God we're able to save now, right? Make sure you guys subscribe us to not miss out on any future character guides and updated rerun characters, and feel free to join us over on Twitch to catch us live. It's been a pleasure chatting with you all. Class is dismissed.